Hi there. I'm Scott Anthony, a professor at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College and the author of the foreword of the recently re-released version of the Innovator Solution by Clayton Christensen. The worst advice I ever got was from my big sister, Michelle. This is a ways back. I was in high school. I had a big crush on a girl. Michelle suggested that I write her a letter explaining exactly what was the basis of my crush and my feelings for her, etc. I did that. It did not work out well. That was the worst advice I ever got.
I love that. That is so good. So why didn't that work out, Scott? Were you a bad writer or what happened here?
That's a great question, Phil. There's a whole bunch of complexity in that. I will say my ability to write in high school was a lot different than my ability to write now. So that has changed a lot over the course of the past 30 plus years. That was probably a piece of it. There was a little bit of overwrought emotions, perhaps, in what was written. And the process of transmission, I didn't give the letter to the exact person. I gave it to someone to give to the person, which in high school is an extraordinarily bad idea. So there was just a lot of missteps along the way.
That's fun. That's so cool. Well, good. Well, I'm glad that your writing has improved and now you're writing forwards to awesome books like The Innovator Solution. So, how did you get picked to write the forward?
You want the honest story? A bunch of other people said no. So the backstory. Clayton Christensen, who wrote the Innovator Solution, Innovator's Dilemma, a bunch of other stuff. He was a professor of mine at the Harvard Business School. I did a couple years of research with him. We wrote a book together. I joined the consulting company that he had founded. Spent 20 years helping to build that, and became a teacher a couple years ago. So I have a very close relationship with Clay. He passed away back in 2020. The publisher said it was going to reissue his two seminal books, The Dilemma and The Solution, this year. And they asked me, who do you think would be good people to write the forward? And I suggested a bunch of names. They got Mark Benioff from Salesforce to write the forward to the Innovator's Dilemma. That was great. Some of the big names they went to for the solution said no. They had three no's, and I won't get those people in trouble by saying who they were, but famous business people. And then they said the answer has been staring us in the face all along. It was you who should write the forward. And I said, well, I'm of course thrilled to do it. I know I was not your first, second, third, or fourth choice, but hey, still it worked out.
That's fantastic. Well, you're still a very good choice. I like the forward. The book is, of course, wonderful and seminal and reminds people how to be more innovative, right? The actual solution, which I think is more interesting in a lot of cases than the dilemma. But I read your article, though, about the persistence of the dilemma. And I think that's interesting. So, why do we think that they haven't learned much from Clay's books that have been around for years and years and years?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that actually led to the path of me teaching, and something I've been puzzling about a lot. Is you look back at Clay's research. He wrote his doctoral thesis in 1993, describing how incumbents would get blindsided by these things that he called disruptive innovations, where the complicated is made simple, the expensive is made affordable. And that idea of disruptive innovation has been discussed, it has been torn apart, it has been really debated. And we now know very clearly what to do in the face of a disruptive change. We know how to spot it. We know how to respond to it. We know how to structure around it. We know the strategic choices to make. Yet still, large organizations still struggle with it. Just look at what's going on in the automobile industry right now, where the big automobile manufacturers are like, oh, there's been a slight temporary slowdown in the sales of electric vehicles. Okay, great, great. We don't really have to do that. We can go back to doing what we always did, which we know how that pans out. We know how that pans out. So even though it's very clear what you need to do, the problem is, in my view, organizations are still run, for now at least, by humans. And humans have biases and blind spots that make the innovator's dilemma that Clay pointed out now so long ago so remarkably deep and so remarkably persistent, because you got to get one, sometimes two levels deeper to really begin to address it. And that's what I try to do with my teaching and research now.
That's awesome. That is awesome and really cool that you get to teach that because that seems like a very relevant topic, especially in this time of AI with students. So how did you, I mean, did you have to convince Dartmouth that this was the course of study that you wanted to teach, or was this something they had an opening for? How did that work, Scott?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of, as always, luck is the residue of design kind of moment. So, I was living in Singapore with my family a few years ago, and we had made the decision it was time to move back to the US. And I had made the decision it was time to start adding teaching to my portfolio. And, I don't have a PhD. So, the path for a non PhD person into schools is pretty random. So I started talking to a bunch of people at a bunch of schools, and I talked to Vijay Govindarajan, who is a very senior professor at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. And I remember the conversation very distinctly. This is kind of late 2021. And at first it was just like, how's life going? How are the kids, et cetera. And I go through all that and I say, I have a thing I want to talk with you about. I want to teach. And he's like, well, that's nice, son. Let's get back to breakfast. And a little bit later in the conversation, he says, do you have an idea about what you want to teach? And I said, yeah. There's all this stuff that we've done in the field, applying Clay's work. I studied this field of system psychodynamics. I think there's an interesting opportunity to marry the two. And the conversation flipped like that because he said, that's interesting. We don't teach something like that at our school. Could you come up with a syllabus for it? And I did. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. So there was not a job opening. There wasn't a spec that I sought to fill, but I did have an idea of teaching this class, and Tuck, to its credit, said, this is an interesting thing that we can add to our curriculum. And here we are. And I've added a
Yeah.
couple other classes along the way as well.
Cool. So other classes as in addition. So what else are they all in the innovation space, Scott, or what are you teaching?
Yeah, so the kind of thread that runs through it all is how do you navigate disruptive change? So leading disruptive change is the main course that I teach. Then I started a new course called Horizon Scanning. How do you have foresight, turn it into insight, turn it into action? And then a new experimental one that I'm teaching right now, AI and consultative decision making. So imagine you're a consultant, you're helping to advise an organization. There's lots of challenges when you're doing that in a great big decision. We have new tools that we can use to address it. How do we use AI to be even better consultants? Which, given a large portion of people from Tuck School and a bunch of business schools going to consulting, I thought would be a nice fusion of different topics. And we're about halfway through, and it's been a ton of fun so far.
Wow. Well, let's talk about that topic because I think that is super interesting. So where do folks get started on that journey towards moving some AI into their consulting business?
Yeah, so what we talk about in the course is we say, okay, let's start with some Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos talks about how there are essentially two types of decisions in organizations. There's a type 1 decision. That's a one-way door. It's irreversible. It's a big, critically important decision. And there's type 2 decisions that are reversible, that it's not too hard to change it if you change your mind, et cetera. So we first said, let's really focus on those type 1 decisions where you're going to radically redesign a product or make a big acquisition or something that's hard to undo if you get it wrong. Say, okay, if you're advising an organization to do that, there's three basic things you have to do. You have to first generate a compelling idea that's creative and also feasible. You have to communicate what can be a very complex concept in a way that grabs people. And then you've got to align a group to go forward with something that's got a lot of risk and uncertainty behind it. So we've got some real problems from some real companies that we've broken students into teams. And we're now, for each of those stages of the process, saying, here are known problems that people have when they do this normally. How might we use AI to overcome them? So for example, generating creative options, there's problems like confirmation bias and functional fixedness, and lots of things that make us pretty limited when we're thinking of ideas. How do we think about opening the aperture by using AI? And we just saw the results of the students trying this a couple days ago, and they learned that AI's got its imperfections, but certainly when used appropriately can lead to some really interesting ideas in a pretty short period of time. And I think that's kind of the headline that's coming out of the class thus far. There's a lot of imperfections in any emergent technology. You have to look deeper than the headlines. You have to play around to really understand what generative AI can do. And when you do it and begin to apply it in the right way, it is an indispensable aid to do the things that we're all trying to do through uncertainty. That's out of my point of view halfway through the class.
Wow. Wow. Well, I like to think of AI as augmented intelligence instead of just artificial, right? It augments what's already up here. So we have to go deeper, go a couple levels down to help us augment what we already know. So how, like, are you just using Chat GPT or is there some special tool that you guys are using, Scott?
Yeah, it's open ended. So we've not put any constraints on it. We said,
Oh,
and I'm not an AI expert, so I'm not saying use this tool versus this tool. And kind of wisdom of crowds. This is an experimental class. It's the second half of the spring semester, so you have lots of other things that are competing for people's time. So we've got 30 brave souls that are in it, and people have used just about everything thus far. So we've had Chat GPT, we've had Cloud that's been used, we've had people who've used open source things that are out there. We've had some people that have tried to create their own. So, we're getting a
oh,
lot of diversity in what people are using. And for the next task, when they have to generate compelling ways to communicate their ideas, I think we're going to see people use even more tools. Is the thing I told them is one rule, no PowerPoint. So you can do whatever you want, but no PowerPoint slides. Like if there's a PowerPoint slide with an embedded video on it, I will accept that. But we need stories, and those stories need to have either pictures or sound or something. So I played around with having Dartmouth's most famous graduate is Theodore Geisel, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss. So I had of course, advertisement in the tone of Dr. Seuss for my idea. And of course, this is what the large language models do exceedingly well. It just had something that really, really nailed it. You had to do the work to come up with the first idea. And that was, as you said, Phil, that was augmented. So that was a little bit of me, a little bit of the tool. That's no good. Let's combine these two things together. Let's forget about that. Let's use that. But then once you get it, you say, okay, let's now explain this. Let's use evocative language to get people hooked around it. It was beautiful, just beautiful.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I've played around with the Dr. Seussification of some of my ideas as well to try to see if it can combine and contrast that sort of stuff. Because I'm no poet, so I like the way that it Seussifies my work sometimes around Dr. Seuss's birthday. Try to be topically relevant. Like, what did you do? Do you like pop in your idea, Scott, and then it Seussified it, or how did that work? Talk to me
Yeah,
about that
the
process.
the the specific thing here, I was inspired first by an academic article that had a few different authors on it that went and looked at different ways to generate ideas because the early research findings show when you use Gen AI to generate ideas, you increase the overall average quality, but you cut off the tails. So you get more kind of A through D letter grades, you get more Bs, fewer Ds, but also fewer As. But the technique that is emerging is the one that's strongest is what's called chain of thought, which is basically you say you have to do these steps, you have to do each single step, you take the process and you really break it into chunks, and you force the AI, even if it doesn't want to, which I'm giving it agency, but whatever, even if it doesn't want you to do each of those steps. So did all that, came up with it with an idea, and then said, okay, let's now take this idea, and I made some modifications to it, and let's imagine how we communicate it. I started with a advertisement in Harvard Business Review. And then I said, okay, let's have a little bit more fun with it. Let's come up with a 10-line Dr. Seuss poem. And I found, like many people have, when you put a constraint on something, make it shorter, make it more of this, less of this, whatever, you get better output. And this ties right into the creativity research that shows if you want things to be more creative, liberate with constraints. The same I'm repeatedly finding is true with artificial intelligence. When you give, 8-page prompts, you get mush. When you give broad prompts, you give mush. When you really focus, you begin to get things that are really good.
Yeah, that's so cool. I would say the same as, like you said there, the same is true about people. The more we can kind of box them in and help them, stay inside the box instead of thinking outside of it, I think we see a lot better results.
Yeah, it's repeatedly shown in research. And it's one of these things, way back to the persistence of the innovator's dilemma. It doesn't feel right when you say, I'm going to liberate you by setting constraints. It's paradoxical. It feels like constraints are constraining, but constraints are liberating. And that is the thing that I have seen repeatedly. Overcoming the innovator's dilemma means living with paradoxes like this, having a paradox mindset where you don't view that as an either or, you find a way to transcend it and you can have both of those things together. And I've almost got now A to Z compendium. It gets a little bit, whatever. The language gets a little weird when you get to X, but almost an A to Z compendium of different paradoxical practices required to navigate disruptive change. And of course, it all starts with having a mindset where you embrace those sorts of things.
Ooh, well, give us a couple more of those, Scott. Give us a couple, maybe I'll pick some letters. So pick F. You got a good
Oh,
one for F?
F good. Fail to succeed. So that was good. I've not been asked to do this on demand, so I'm not sure what some of the letters would be harder than others, but F, fail to succeed. And we know this in the innovation space. We know that in order to ultimately succeed, there's going to be false steps and fumbles and missteps along the way. And this has been one of the fun things for my next project. I have a book I'm working on the history of disruptive innovation with the tentative title Anomalies Wanted: A Brief History of Disruption. And one of the findings that I've seen persistently is overnight successes are usually decades in the making. So
Yeah.
as an example, I ask people, how old is this device, the Apple iPhone? And people will say 2007. I say, let's go back, because you can talk about wireless technologies from the 1920s, the transistor from 1947, Gorilla Glass starting in 1952 with something that didn't work in the lab, a mistake that ended up being a happy accident that led to. So, this idea that on the path to success, there's going to be a lot of failures is very time tested in the innovation space. Fail to succeed.
Awesome. I'm going to give you one more and then I'll let you pick your favorite. I'm going to pick P just because that's how my name starts. Can
P.
you know P?
P, I don't know what I have as P immediately, but what I will say, what I will go with P is pessimistic optimism. So it
Oh,
doesn't have a verb in it, so that doesn't work perfectly. But pessimistic optimism, so the pessimism, Andy Grove was famous for saying only the paranoid survive. And indeed, you need to be pessimistic. You need to be paranoid to see a problem. The pessimist sees the problem, the optimist creates the solution. If you only see problems, you get very rigid in your response. That's what my colleague Clark Gilbert found in his doctoral research a few decades ago. So you need the pessimism, but you have to let go of the pessimism. So pessimistic optimism is a key to success.
awesome. I love that one. So give us, what's your favorite that you wrote down, or maybe your most surprising one?
The one I start with I'm also teaching this in my class next week, so it's top of mind. Act when the data tells you not to. So this is the root of this is what we call the information action paradox. And the idea is the amount of information you have and your freedom to act are inversely related. So in the early days, you can do whatever you want, but there's no data, there's no information to guide your decision. At some point, the right thing to do is perfectly clear, but you can't do it anymore because that data has been created by people launching businesses, getting customers, developing technologies, and so on. So the trick, if you're a leader, is to recognize that you cannot wait until data are clear. If you wait that long, it's too late. So you have to act when the data tells you not to. That's not to say that you avoid or ignore data. It's just a recognition that you need to have intuition. You need to have some wisdom. You need to be able to see the faint signals. You need to be able to take all those things and be a leader that can make a call before the data are all clear. And that's not an easy thing to do for lots of very understandable reasons.
Yeah. So I heard somewhere, because I was in the military, that some great generals said that at 60%, make the decision. When you have 60% of the data, it's time to move forward. Is that what the data shows for you too?
Absolutely. And it gets attributed, that line gets attributed to various people. Colin Powell is the one that I heard it attributed to.
Okay.
And it's either 60% in some telling, 70% others. Whatever it is, it's more than 50%. Less than 50%, you're coin flipping, and coin flipping is not good. And you get above three quarters, that's when it's really okay, clear enough to make it. So it's somewhere in that zone. By the way, my brain found what the P what I have on my
Oh,
list. Pause to accelerate.
pause to accelerate. Well, good. Well, let's go deeper on that one then, because that one totally makes sense, right? That's a slow down to speed up kind of type, right?
Exactly. And the Navy SEALs tell us that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And that's exactly what we need to do in business. And it's really hard because you're operating in these environments where things are changing so quickly. And you've got, again, this kind of paradoxical tension on you. There's one part of you that says, I've got to make decisions at the pace and scale of things going on around me. So I got to move fast. There's another part of you that says, I'm so confused by everything. I just want to stop. I don't want to do anything, head in the sand and all that. So again, you got to both end it, which means you do have to pause. You have to have the ability, as Ron Heifetz and the Adaptive Leadership Group would say, get off of the dance floor, go to the balcony, sense make, see all the things that are going on, say, that's the one I need to do. Because in having that moment where you pause, you see the path to go and accelerate and achieve what you want to achieve more quickly. You look at the research that's been done about large projects, it's very clear. You plan slow, act fast. Slow planning allows you to be really clear about what you're trying to do. And then once you know it's time to dig the tunnel or build the metro or whatever, time is not your friend. The more time you allow, the more things that can go wrong. Every time I drive through the Big Dig
I
project in
was just going to
Boston,
say that. That's funny.
yes, it is a good example of how big things do not get done or get done, 20 years late and many, many, many billions of dollars over budget.
Wow. Wow. Well, it sounds like you also keep up on all the latest research and all of that for that. So what are you reading these days, Scott? What are you putting in your head to stay sharp and stay innovative?
The thing I started to do a few years ago, once I said I was going to make this transition from being a consultant to being I don't know, teacher, sometimes academic, sometimes professor, whatever. I still haven't figured out the right label for it. I said I need to, while I don't plan to contribute a high volume to the scholarly literature, I need to be familiar with it. So what I now do is, in addition to the stuff that I've always read, which is The Economist and Harvard Business Review and Sloan Management Review and some pop culture stuff, just to keep myself fresh, and a lot of sports stuff. That's how I clear my mind sometimes. I just created email alerts for all the major academic journals, and I don't read them
Oh,
cover to cover because there's a lot of stuff in it that has no interest or relevance to me. But when I see something that's of interest, then you go and read the article. And you sometimes will find these just amazing things. As an example, a few weeks ago, I was on my way to Japan. I'm doing a case study about a Japanese company that has undergone a really impressive transformation over the past few years. I can't reveal who it is yet, but it's a good case study. And I'm reading this article that had caught my eye on the plane. It's about long-lived firms and lessons from long-lived firms. And it's specifically focused primarily on sake brewers in Kyoto. And one of their findings is that long-lived firms play with time or think about time in a different way. The people who are running the companies do not think of themselves as in a finite existence. They think about the past, they think about the future. And I saw the exact same thing when I was researching this company that I'm talking to. They say, I was talking to its CFO, and they made some really bold investments. I said, wasn't that hard? Because, CFOs don't like to write big checks. And he said, well, on the one hand, yes, because, it made the week, month, quarter more difficult. On the other hand, we've been around for 140 years. We want to be around for the next 100 years. With that lens, it's obvious that we're going to make this investment. So this academic paper talked about how long-lived firms have this bounded imagination because they're playing with time in a different way and they're conscious of it. They can be very imaginative, but it's within the constraints of what will be the thing that continues from generation to generation. And I've seen this exact same thing at this company that I'm researching. So it's one of these beautiful things where there's an emerging academic idea that exists in the Academy of Management Journal. There's a real company that's demonstrating this. And one of the things that I just love is when you can put those kinds of pieces together.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, I'll have to do some of that because you've definitely got some interesting stuff that you like to talk about. But let's end up talking about baseball. You guys see you got a baseball behind you. I love baseball. Is the Red Sox your team?
Well, I was born in Bethesda, Maryland. I grew up as a Baltimore Orioles fan. We had season tickets from 1984 to 1997, and I went to many, many games during that time period. I moved up here, and it's hard not to fall in love with the Red Sox here. So the Red Sox and the Orioles kind of go back and forth in my loyalty. My kids are huge Red Sox fans, though, clearly.
Awesome. So who's the baseball behind you, Scott?
So the story of the baseball behind me, this is a nice family story. This is actually from opening day. Opening day this year, I went with my 7-year-old son, Teddy. We're in Fenway Park, over by the pesky pole, and we're yelling at the new right fielder, Tyler O'Neill. Teddy's cute little 7-year-old. He's got his hat, he's got his glove. Throw us a ball, throw us a ball, throw us a ball. And we don't get one, don't get one, don't get one. Finally, in the 8th inning, they finished their warm-ups. He turns, he looks, and he's like 120 feet away or whatever. And he points and he throws it to me, not Teddy, which was a bad call because I didn't have a glove. And I caught it, dropped it. It hit the railing, and I caught it again, so I held on to it. I gave it to Teddy, and he said thanks. He gets a ball every game he goes to. I don't know how he does it. He's a ball magnet. He says, I really want to give this ball to you. And I said, well, that's really nice. Will you sign it for me? And he brought a pen to the game because we're by the pesky pole, and you go and sign it. And he signed it. And this is, I don't know how well you'll be able to see it, but there you go.
Aw, that's so awesome,
So
Scott.
it says, this one is for you, Dad. Love, Teddy. So that is the opening day 2024 Tyler O'Neill. Pretty good shape ball. And my wife got a little case for it, and it sits behind me now. So that's the
That's
ball
beautiful.
story.
I love that. That's very cool. Well, Scott, if people want to find more of you, where should they go? Where should they find you online?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is the place where I live most of the time. So if you just look for Scott Anthony Tuck, you find me there, or you just Google Scott Anthony Tuck, you'll find the website at Tuck, and that's the easiest way to keep up with me.
Very cool. Well, Scott, I learned a lot about innovation and a little bit about the joy of being a father in baseball. So I love that, man. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. I appreciate you.